All right. So let's dive into practice a little bit. So, like, what does your personal practice routine look like? How do you practice?
What, individually or as a team?
Individually, we'll get into team a little bit later.
So for me, it varies a lot because I have a lot of responsibility in the team. So over the player break, I didn't really do anything. But in a regular season, it would be sort of, in terms of improving myself, it would be like trying to figure out how I can improve my calling. But that's obviously not an easy thing to do. And I think there's probably different ways to do it. But for me, it's just watching people play and trying to watch games back that you've played, which can be quite annoying when you've lost a game, obviously. But outside of that, improving individually is just like playing deathmatch. So before we practice, we try and have like 30 minutes of deathmatch before, or if it's a day off or whatever, just playing a bit of deathmatch or some face hits with people. That's all I really do, to be honest.
Right. So, like, how did you sort of decide on focusing on these areas and like how to distribute your time?
Um, I don't think I've always been great at doing it. I'd obviously learn over the course of year and a half, 2 years. Um, but it's just something that I've thought needed to happen. I didn't really learn it from anyone. 'Cause I think it's hard to learn how to IGL, especially in smaller scenes where there's no like I compare it to like Denmark and stuff. There's no people above you to teach you how to do it. So for me, it was always sort of learn as you go. But it works best for me. I don't know if it'll work best for everyone else. It's just something that I've figured out over like a year and a half or so.
Right, and it's interesting, like the practice being an IGL part. What are you sort of looking for when you're watching your games, and like how can I improve my calling? What should people keep an eye out if they want to replicate it?
Um, Sometimes I find it quite fun just to watch a point of view of the IGL or the team you're watching to see how you can kind of see when the calls get made and the choices get made. Just by watching them, sometimes it's quite fun. But at the same time, looking at the bigger picture of things, like when I watch a game back, it's not a case of just watching it. I don't spend half an hour just watching the game. It's a lot of rewinding, a lot of pausing it, going back, seeing what actually happened, what caused something to happen. But it's not always clear what happens all the time, which is why it's quite a difficult topic to talk about. If you don't know for sure why a certain call was made, you have to make a lot of assumptions, I think, as an IGL when you're watching demos, especially of other teams. It's easy to watch your games back of your own team and be like, okay, we did this wrong, or oh, we missed this flash, or the strat I've called isn't the right one to call, or whatever. But it's a lot of looking at the small areas of the game. Like you might not even realize that someone's made some sound somewhere and that's what they're reacting to, or it might just be a call from the start of the round. It's just a lot of demo watching and rewinding and trying to figure out what's going on, especially in tier 1 games.
Right. So, about the team part, like how do you practice as a team? How's that time divided?
So for us, we play full time. So we have a set schedule that we play, which might not be the case for everyone. Other teams, especially lower end teams, we play 6 days a week. Um, we try to balance it between practicing in matches and playing officials, and then balancing that with the server time and the theory work, or like demo reviews and sort of like I call them briefs. Like we'll sit on a server for a bit, talk about stuff, or we'll watch a demo together, or we'll just talk about things about CS and theory crafts and stuff. So we try to balance it all between that. But I mean, typically we'll play sort of 5 hours a day maybe of practice, and we'll try and add like 2 or 3 hours of server time. But it might change week to week. Really depends on the schedule of like officials and stuff.
Right. So, say you were an amateur lower end team, maybe you have like 3 hours, 3 days a week or something like that. How would you focus your time then? Like, what would you make sure to prioritize if you were in that position?
If you're an amateur team, I think server time is really important to begin with. I think if you have limited time, starting out with like an hour of server time and then 2 practice games is probably beneficial. Just in the server time doing useful things, making strats that you want to call, making sure everyone understands them, dry running the strats, and then for CT side the same thing. Like I think it's people always see CT a bit differently, but it's almost the same as T side. You make strats and you can call strats on CT as much as you can on T side. It's just a bit different. But making sure everyone understands that, and then just playing 1 or 2 games a night. I think you'll find a lot of benefits from doing some server time. I think it's often underlooked, to be honest.
Right. I'm wondering, like, when you mention strats, like what sort of detail do you think you should go into as an amateur team? Because like I've seen everything from like, okay, you're gonna go in and take this exact entry route and peek at this exact angle to all the way back to almost only doing defaults. Like what do you think is the sort of detail that's reasonable and productive as an amateur team?
I think you have to at least know everyone's roles in a strat so that you understand sort of what your job is as each individual player, understand sort of the objective of the strat. So like, and I think there's a lot of content on YouTube now. There used to be less of it, but I think now there's a lot of it where people will record strats for you. I think a lot of top teams even use the channels on YouTube just to copy strats from, because they'll record every point of view, they record the overview and stuff like that, and it's just like you can just instantly copy it. It takes 5 minutes. But in terms of the detail, it's like just knowing that everyone's confident in what the strat is and they know what their job is at the very least, and then from there you can adapt and change it however you want, and that's when sort of the better tier 1 teams and stuff, they'll adapt strategies and they'll change them slightly to counter different things.
Right. Okay. So how do you sort of prepare for each game as you get into an official?
So I think every game's a bit different. There are some things that are the same every time. For example, we might warm up for a game if it's the first game of the day in the evening. But if it's a really early morning game, we probably wouldn't. We'll just do like individual warm up, like deathmatch and stuff like that. But we always prepare for our games as best we can, in the sense that we'll always try and anti-strat teams and look at them and see how they play where we can. Sometimes it's not always the case. You don't know who you're playing until the day before or something. It's not always possible to do that, but we always try to. I think it's often a part of tier 1, tier 2 CS that's probably overlooked. Just preparing for games the best way you can, so that it helps me call better and it helps everyone understand how the games can get played a little bit better. That you can make a game plan and stuff like that. I think is really important.